The late Queen's favoured son, now persona non grata. Andrew, the man who didn't sweat. Joining me live now is royal historian and writer Tessa Dunlop. Tessa, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it because I know you've just come from Newsnight on the BBC, who broke a lot of this news around Prince Andrew with that interview, that extraordinary interview 5 years ago. What was the discussion on that panel tonight from the BBC?
They actually led with Virginia Giuffre's direct immediate family, who
Amazing.
spoke down the barrel and very movingly, tearfully, about the bittersweet moment that this was. Of course, their sister having taken her life just months ago in April, at the same time as we see this complete defenestration of a British prince, a man who on that platform, Newsnight, flagrantly denied not just not having sex with her, but even knowing her. And I think what's happened since that fateful interview has been this extraordinary merry-go-round where the British public and beyond have been asked to believe Andrew, if not right being on his side, might was on his side. Financially, he paid off loads of money, his mother's untaxed money, incidentally, to stop a case being brought against him with a woman apparently he'd never met. It just didn't stack up. And then you had, most recently and fatally from Andrew's point of view, the email where he is overtly creepy. Not only does it expose him as a liar, and if he lied about one email and when he last met Epstein, but it also exposed him as gross. He said, we'll play again soon, and it doesn't have to rise above it, i.e. him and Epstein were literally above the law. They could do what they like, and for many years, clearly, they did do what they liked.
Adding to that by no means exhaustive list that you've given us, Tessa, he somehow needed to do the honourable thing to go to New York to break off his friendship with the then convicted pedophile. He needed to do that over a 4-day weekend in a walk in Central Park. As you say, he's never explained if he's never met this woman, Virginia Giuffre, why a reported $12 million sum was then paid to her. The other thing is, most recently, apparently asking his private security to look into Virginia Giuffre with the intention of putting together a dirt file which could only be seen as an attempt to undermine her credibility. I'm so glad you said that Newsnight led with the family of Virginia Giuffre, because I also wanted to ask you about this. Obviously, whatever comes out of Buckingham Palace is carefully worded. I thought the sting in the tail from that statement from Andrew was this: Their Majesties wish to make clear that their thoughts and utmost sympathies have been and will remain with the victims and survivors of any and all forms of abuse. That makes it clear that even though he hasn't had his day in court, the King believes Virginia Giuffre, it would seem, even if Prince Andrew, no longer Prince, says he doesn't even know her.
Sure. I think the broader question is, and certainly younger generations are feeling thoroughly repulsed by all of this, the broader question is the sort of Damocles hung over Andrew's head now for years. So why has it taken this long for a clear statement in support of the victims from Buckingham Palace? Why has it taken this long to get rid of that title prince? Because it's within the King's powers. He can fiddle about as much as he likes. In fact, the Queen last amended the letters patent in 2012 so that if William had girls, they too could have royal titles. So it can be amended. It finally has been now, but it took a lot to get there. And I think some are wondering, those who are more inclined to be sceptical about the royal family, to what extent is this performative, hacking off the sibling leg, if you like, to save the monarchy? And just to give you a sense, Laura, of what's going on at the moment in Britain, these questions that are being asked and the prospect of tabling questions in a very unconstitutional way in Parliament isn't really done. There is, if you like, blood in the water. And I think a real concern from the royal family of where will this stop? Because ultimately, this devastatingly tragic memoir is published, and yet all the attention is suddenly focused on Royal Lodge, and a realization from journalists, from historians,
Right.
from the public at large, we don't really understand the rules that govern the royal family, because quite frankly, they are above most rules in this country.
Tessa, as you say, that interview with Emily Maitlis was 5 years ago and he became meme culture. He was an embarrassment to the royal family then. But you're right. I want to know what has happened. Why now? Was the final straw this posthumous memoir?
I think it was the timing of the posthumous memoir, almost the same moment we have clear proof, black and white proof, that Andrew lied on that Newsnight interview.
Yeah.
Vast majority of us were like, you doth protest too much, mate. It doesn't look like a phony photograph to me. So those two coming at the same time. But the broader picture is the Epstein files, which, by the way, are a squeaky wheel for Trump and many more in the American administration.
Yeah.
When are they going to be exposed? And how much more damage can the royal family take? They need to look like they're ahead of the wheel here, even though we know they're actually years behind the wheel, Laura. That's the truth.
They are years behind the wheel, absolutely. And this would be something for William in particular that perhaps he pushed even further. Also, don't want to conjure up conspiracy theories here, but we know how taken Trump is with the royal family. He loves the pomp and ceremony. Had a great meeting with King Charles not that long ago. There's a difference between the Epstein files and the list. So who's in the files and who's on the list, if you like. It's a small distinction, but I think an important one. Is there a chance, given, King Charles and Trump's great affection for each other, surely they had a discussion about this?
I'm almost sure they didn't have a discussion about
Really?
that. Funnily enough, you mentioned, I think men of a certain age find this stuff really uncomfortable. I know that a huge number of the older, slightly more male, pompous royal correspondents, there's plenty of them over here in Britain, find this whole Andrew question very difficult. Oh, well, you're 17 after all, kind of thing. There is a kind of denial. It's hugely generational. And that is why I think you're right to assume a huge amount of the heft not only came from government and public opinion, but also from the Waleses, from Catherine and William, because they're far more aware of what the younger generation are thinking. And the king is frail. He's still undergoing cancer treatment. He's a transition king. Yeah. Charles will not last forever. We know that. And William needs to make sure the house is in order, aware that facing him down is a dissenting younger generation. Previously young, like you and me, were we really that into monarchy when we were like 20? Probably not. But we weren't overtly anti it. And what you have now is a hardening of sentiment among the young. If you look at the polling, they're not apathetic about monarchy, they're anti-monarchy. That ain't healthy if you are a constitutional monarchy.
I find it really extraordinary because there's been a couple of kind of obscure commentators that have been falling over themselves trying to prove that this photo is doctored and that Prince Andrew is just being stitched up. How quiet or otherwise are they today?
I think that they find ways of deflecting it. They'll go back in history and say, there's in 1917, a couple of princes had their titles removed because they fought for the Kaiser. They sort of get in among the weeds of history and they find it easier to avoid the more contemporary tough stuff. I think, Laura, there will be questions asked, and I don't think this will entirely go away. People are suddenly aware of how little they understand about the rules that govern our monarchy. For example, you mentioned the seismic £12 million, it's thought, that was used to pay off Virginia Dufresne. Still, by the way, wasn't enough for her to hold on to her life, interestingly and tragically. That money probably came from the Duchy of Lancaster, which is a giant portfolio that belongs to the monarch, the profits of which are, they're not subjected, they go directly to the monarch, they're not subjected to corporation tax, to capital gains tax. And don't forget also that going down the line of succession, the royal family are not subjected to inheritance tax. At the same time as they have these huge business and land portfolios, they have direct back channels to government. And we as journalists and citizens cannot table freedom of information inquiries about the royal family. So Andrew's time as a trade envoy is protected and embargoed, from 105 years from his birth simply because he's royal. Now, whether that will change because he is no longer a prince, I don't know. But these are big, big questions. And I don't know if I've got time for a final thought, do I?
You do, quickly, please.
Yeah, there's two photos, actually. There's the one, Andrew, 41-year-old, with the teenage Virginia Dufresne. Also in that picture, Ghislaine Maxwell. Maxwell's in prison. Virginia is dead. There's a second picture, and that is of Harvey Weinstein, Jeffrey Epstein, and Maxwell in the grounds of the Royal Lodge. Two of those players in that picture are in prison, and Epstein is dead. So either in prison or dead, and the only man wandering around at large until this morning, a prince, Andrew. And I think it was just so sickening. Everyone had had enough. They really had had enough.
Tessa Dunlop, we really appreciate your insights. Thanks so much.